Welcome to my favorite video of the week, Pokemon Pocket gamers. Thousands of players competed in tournaments since the Triumphant Light card pack released, and I've dug through them all looking for the sweetest decks that had successful results. Let's go ahead and take a look at a bunch of neat deck lists that could be the next big thing in Pokemon Pocket. We kick things off today with the deck list I'm looking forward to playing the most: Starmie EX, Glaceon EX. I was super excited to see this deck list post a 7-3 finish in the Ursi Day tournament. I think water decks in general are really appealing right now because Misty and Irida are arguably the two most powerful supporter cards in the game. Irida, especially when paired with the free retreat cost on Starmie, is often going to heal 80 or occasionally even triple digits worth of damage from our board, giving us a ton of sustain. Misty needs no introduction at this point, I'm sure. She gets you completely free game wins on things like Glaceon and Palkia when you flip a ton of heads, but she's really stellar with Starmie, even flipping a single heads when you're going first, allowing you to start cracking for 90 before your opponent can even evolve into their first stage 1. The person who piloted this deck is actually a member of the Hoglandia Discord server, and they mentioned that they were only playing a copy of Baby Glaceon split with the EX because they're actually missing the second EX from their collection. So when I load this up, I'll definitely be playing the full suite of Glaceon EX. The Starmie build wasn't the only variation of Glaceon to finish 7-3 in the Ursi Day tournament. Another one playing Articuno as the third Pokemon line finished 7-3 as well. While Articuno is a little bit less aggressively slanted than Starmie, it is a little bit more consistent since it's only a basic Pokemon as opposed to a stage 1, and taking up less deck slots means you get more access to utility supporters such as the full copies of Cyrus and Sabrina that we see here. I'd like to dedicate this next section to all the Garchomp haters that have been in my comments since this card pack dropped, because not one, not two, but 3 different Garchomp variations made deep runs in tournaments this weekend, some of them posting multiple results. The first of these went 10-1 in one of our community tournaments featuring the Garchomp Fighting Box package, as I like to call it. We have Sudowoodo, Marshadow, and Hitmonlee as single knockout point Pokemon that you can lead on while you develop your powerful stage 2 behind it. I think Sudowoodo in particular is going to be really well positioned the way our metagame is looking to be shaping up, dealing 50 points of damage for a single energy to things like Dialga and Arceus. You hit for weakness up to 70, and even Leafeon gets to take hits, and then Sudowoodo can survive a hit back thanks to Giant Cape, has a lot of value with what's going to be going on. One of the big upsides, in my opinion, of playing Garchomp as your stage 2 top end in these fighting box style shells is the fact that you feel less bad about only playing a single copy of Hitmonlee. Something that often happens with Hitmonlee decks in my experience is you'll tap their back Pokemon once or twice, and then it'll ultimately end up getting knocked out before you can secure a KO, and Garchomp can follow up with its linear attack cracking for 50 to kind of finish what Hitmonlee started without you having to commit a second additional deck slot to another Hitmonlee. Next up, we have a Garchomp Aerodactyl list that finished 7-3 in the Ursi Day tournament. That's actually card for card one of the 2 Garchomp deck lists I featured in my decks for every EX Pokemon roundup on Saturday morning. I'll link that in the video description down below if you missed it. The appeal of this build is you kind of abuse the basic Pokemon starting rule that we see like 18 trainer decks use to guarantee that you're going to start on Gibble. One of the big upsides that Garchomp has is that it's a Pokemon that very elegantly goes up the curve naturally into its stage 2, regardless of if you're going first or second. When you're going first, you get to evolve into Gabite, attach an energy, crack for 30. You then evolve into Garchomp, attach your second energy, attack for 50, and then you can start cleaning for 100 or 50 to the backline, depending on which is better from every turn after. Chomp also works really well while going second. You attack for 20 with Gibble, you attack for 30 with Gabite, and then when you hit the Garchomp line, you can either linear attack the bat line or crack the front right away for 100, giving you a lot of flexibility in the way the game plays out. Aerodactyl felt like an ideal backup Pokemon for this setup because it's a second EX Pokemon to move into once they knock out your Chomp, and its Primeval Law ability seems exceedingly relevant in a metagame where Leafeon and even Executor still are often running around that can give our Garchomp lead otherwise a hard time. Our third Garchomp variation that went 7-3 in the Ursi Day tournament is featuring Lucario and Marshadow as its additional support Pokemon. Lucario's upside is that it allows your Garchomp to do its best Machamp impersonation with its 3 energy attack, cracking for 120 as opposed to just 100. One of the downsides of this build compared to the Fighting Box build that we talked about at the start that had a slightly better record is the fact that you're not going to typically lead single knockout point into single knockout point into Garchomp, because it's pretty important that your Lucario survives so its Pokemon ability can support Chomp as it gets up to the front. That being said, one upside this build has is that it's a really stellar Pokemon communication deck, because you're always going to be looking for a particular evolution line and likely have too many of one and not enough of the other to have very clear lines on what you're throwing back and when. While Arceus EX Dialga is definitely the breakout deck in our early metagame, there are a ton of people finding success with Arceus and a lot of other varying shells as well, sporting the Pokemon that worship him and get that extra bonus. Let's go ahead and dive on into the 50 Shades of Arceus that put up results this early tournaments. First up, we have Arceus Crobat Carnivine that went 8-2 on day 1 of the Ursi Day tournament. I think Carnivine in particular is a really appealing attacker right now. Dealing 50 for 1 is really stellar against all of the 150 HP basic Pokemon that are running around. And when you add some chip shots from Crobat into the mix, you get to deal that extra 30. It lets you clear through things with capes. Speaking of capes, Crobat is also really good with Arceus' own breakpoints, letting you get up to 160 points of damage in a single swing, which clears out most of the threats in the metagame in a single go. It's noteworthy that this deck list should only be playing grass energy, and your Golbat and Zubat attack for colorless, and then your Crobat has a free retreat cost at the top end of your curve to bounce out of the active spot when you're ready to start using its ability as opposed to attacking. The next Carnivine Arceus deck features Rotom as its secondary attacker and then Sky Shaman as a support utility card. This went 10-1 in one of the community tournaments, and I've actually played a bit with it, and it'll be the deck highlight on this channel later today, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. I absolutely love everything that this deck list has going on. It reminds me of the Fighting Box style decks in the previous metagames that were really sweet to play and had a ton of lines. Carnivine provides you with early pressure, and Rotom has the flexibility similar to Hitmonlee to kick past whatever defensive lead your opponent might have, allowing Cyrus to pull up anything from their backline for Carnivine and Arceus to pressure further. Sky Shaman really feels like it ties the room together. It lets this deck not play any copies of X speed and maneuver things around with a lot of clean finesse. It also is a basic Pokemon that's really important for your Arceus hitting for lots of damage, allowing us to play a full 8, which feels like it's key since a lot of the time a Rotom and a Carnivine are going to be getting knocked out before Arceus moves up to your active spot to close out the game. Next up, we have a Manaphy version of Arceus that finished 6-2 in one of our community tournaments featuring Abomasnow. I think this is actually my favorite build of Manaphy I've played to date, and we'll have a highlight with it on the channel later this week. In particular, one problem Manaphy felt like it always had in the previous metagame was that after you started on Manaphy, you generally wanted to pivot into another 1 knockout point Pokemon, because going Manaphy directly into an EX meant your opponent only had to knock out 2 things to win the game. Abomasnow is a card that has a hefty amount of HP and hits for a pretty reasonable amount of damage, making it a stellar follow up to Manaphy. And because Abomasnow only needs 2 energy to attack with your Arceus, it's actually a pretty good lead in the games where you don't start on Manaphy. You can put an energy on the Snover, attack for 10, and then you put an energy on the Abomasnow and start cracking for 80 every turn until they eventually take it down. One other thing that's appealing about pairing Arceus with Manaphy is the fact that both of these cards really want you to have a lot of basic Pokemon. Arceus needs a full bench to deal lots of damage, and Manaphy really wants you to have 2 extra basics on your bench early, so that way when you're using its gift attack, you're getting the maximum amount of value from it. A second variation of Arceus Manaphy finished 7-3 in one of our community tournaments, this one featuring Rotom and Mythical Island Tauros as its supports as opposed to Abomasnow. I actually really like the configuration of this one as well. Rotom does a fantastic Hitmonlee impersonation that when paired with Cyrus feels really clean into a lot of decks in the metagame. There's also a lot of EX Pokemon popping up in the tournament results right now, which could mean that Tauros is potentially well positioned. One of the reasons why it fell out of favor was the combination of Magnezone being really popular and opposing EX Pokemon being slightly more healthy with Cape. Rotom helps solve that second problem though, since you can tap things a couple of times on the back line before dragging them up with Cyrus, allowing Tauros to clean them out with its 120 point swing. This deck list also follows that same kind of template I talked about with the previous one, where you lead on Manaphy, charge up your back attackers, move into another one knockout point Pokemon, and then eventually close the game out with Arceus as your heavy hitter. Moving along to Heatran versions of Arceus, we had one finish 9-3, playing Heatran, Arceus, and Rotom as its third Pokemon line. As someone who always enjoys playing with cards that have free retreat cost, this build looks incredibly appealing to me. Heatran in particular is a card I've really liked the flexibility of in the games that I've played with it. You can use it as just a tanky front line to stall while you build up Arceus as your first attacker, and then the free retreat cost lets you pivot as soon as you're ready. However, it also attacks pretty well itself, especially when you're going second. You can go ahead and attach energy and then energy, and often crack for 40 and then 80 right away, or even more than that if you're playing at something like Leafeon, where the fire weakness is going to be relevant. One of the big upsides of playing a build like this is the fact that you're on all basic Pokemon for your 6, means that you get to play a huge range of utility cards like 2 copies of Cyrus to really maximize the chip shot damage that your Rotom is able to deal. I also absolutely love the copy of Dawn that you get to fit into your 14 trainers in this deck, because it means in the games where you do start on dealing damage with Heatran or Rotom, you get to retreat them for free and then move their energy up to Arceus, letting you attack with it a turn before your opponent is often expecting you to. Our last Arceus deck list went 8-3 in one of our community tournaments. It's an updated variation of the Druddigon Greninja control shell that I absolutely love the look of. This deck list is notably playing both fire and water energy to be able to attack with your Druddigon and Greninja, and Arceus doesn't mind the mix since it's attacking for just colorless. This deck list feels like a potentially better variation of the Gyarados Greninja deck that we saw dominate in previous metagames, with the upside that it has room to play way more utility trainers like 2 copies of Cyrus and even a Rocky Helmet, because our finisher being Arceus means that we are able to only need a basic Pokemon for it. That gives us more deck space for these utility cards. We're also playing a copy of Heatran, which isn't going to attack super consistently in our 2-color energy deck, but it's kind of just doing its best third Druddigon impersonation, being a wall, giving us time to set up Greninja and Arceus in the backline. Finally, because I know it's easy to get caught up in the hype of all the brand newest, shiniest things, I wanted to call out some other older deck lists only featuring a couple or almost no newer cards that are finding success in this shifting metagame. We kick things off with a Starmie EX, Gyarados EX, Manaphy configuration that went 7-3 in one of our community tournaments. Our only new card here is a single copy of Irida, but I think mostly what this deck list says to me in my mind is that a fast Starmie is likely pretty good into dirtily things like Dialga that are hitting for minimal amounts of damage to start, and when you combine that with Gyarados as a second big punch in the backline, I think you're going to be able to keep up a lot of the time. Up next, we have a Machamp EX Pseudo-Wudo deck that went 5-2 in one of our community tournaments. I think fighting box decks in general are primed to return to the metagame in a big way if Executor EX ends up getting pushed out like our meta report made it seem was possible yesterday. Pseudo-Wudo in particular lines up so well into all of these 150 HP basic EX Pokemon. You put 1 energy on it and you start dealing massive amounts of damage, so that by the time you have your Machamp EX built up in the back, you're ready to come in and absolutely clean them out. One really important breakpoint to call out for Pseudo-Wudo is the fact that it is fighting type means that it actually deals a whopping 70 to Arceus per attack. Next up, we have a Gengar EX Mismagius EX deck list that went 7-2 in one of our community tournaments. Gengar EX is a Pokemon that keeps getting more and more appealing in my mind as more powerful supporters are added to the game. Irida is now an additional card that adds sustain alongside Erica that Gengar EX is really potent against, and Mismagius, I'm biased because it was a pet card of mine last season, but dealing 70 for 2 and the confusion giving you more virtual sustain as well has always felt quite potent to me whenever she gets online. Finally, we have a Gallade EX Fighting Box variation featuring Hitmonlee and Marshadow as its supplementary attackers that went 9-1 day 1 of the Ursi Day tournament. I've said it a couple of times, but I'm just going to keep saying it. I think these fighting decks have always been pretty good in Pokemon Pocket, but they were just especially poorly positioned in our previous metagame where Executor was absolutely everywhere. With the grass hype dying down in the face of Dialga and Arceus, I think all of the variations of this deck are going to be coming back. Gallade in particular is especially appealing against the format's new metagame powerhouse, Arceus, because Arceus being weak to fighting energy means Gallade hits it for 150 points of damage in a single attack. One thing that I might consider in this deck list is a copy of Giovanni, because getting up to 160 means you clear an Arceus through a cape in a single go when it has 3 energy on it. If you want to see a bunch of these decks in action over the course of the next week, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm going to be uploading 1 to 2 daily deck highlights every single day of the week as we explore a ton of the awesome things that this metagame has to offer. If you made it this far into the video, you probably enjoyed at least some of what I had to say. I'd implore you to smash that like button to help it reach some more people. I would love to hear in the comments down below what deck lists you've been finding success with that I should consider trying out in the future. I appreciate everyone that made it all the way to the end, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.